If you have just discovered that you have a low performer on your team, you're probably not the only one who knows. Unless you've got superpowers, your team, especially your high performers, have been working around this low performer or suffering with them for weeks, months, or even years before you found out. Your stakeholders and customers, the same. It's quite possible your manager knows already. You could be the last to realize, not least because you probably found out because of feedback from one or more of these people. And here's the thing. Every day that this low performer performs badly on your team, whatever the reason, it's another negative mark for you as a manager. And if you don't deal with it, your high performers will leave to better teams, your team's performance will suffer more, and eventually you, as the manager of that team, will be considered to be a low performer too, and rightly so. Because remember, as a manager, you are responsible for building a high performance team. And one of the most important parts of that is dealing with the inevitable low performers. Every team has them from time to time. Great managers invest more of their attention and energy in their high performers than in their low performers because that's where they get the best results, and delivering results is the job. Now, some people get servant leadership a bit wrong here. The thing is, you serve the team to deliver results. You don't sacrifice results to serve the team, and especially you don't sacrifice results to serve the lowest performers on your team. So one of the biggest mistakes that inexperienced managers do with very good intentions is to spend too much time for too long coaching, or rather helping, the low performers with no end in sight, no deadline, and no next action. So I want to share one situation I had as a manager with someone on my team. We'll call him Mark. I've changed his name to protect the innocent. Everyone liked him. I liked him. He was smart. He was so capable, but he just wasn't performing. He made careless mistakes. He worked on the wrong things. He didn't meet standards, and so on. I'd try helping him, I'd guiding him, informal coaching in the moment, but I never really faced up to the hard conversation I needed to have with him, which was about the gap between his performance and my expectations, or the expectations of the organization. And he ended up taking more and more of my time, leaving me less time available to work with the rest of my team. Eventually, my manager pulled me aside in an uncomfortably small and stuffy meeting room and asked me if I was aware of the problem with Mark's performance. I told him I'd been aware of it for a while and working with him for months. He asked me for my coaching plan, my timeline, and next steps. Cue uncomfortable silence as he and I both realized I didn't have these things and I didn't really know how to deal with low performers. So he then explained to me the three options I had for dealing with Mark, and that he wanted to know my coaching plan and timeline and how I was going to approach these options by the end of next week. And he wanted to review the performance of my other direct reports the week after to make sure there were no other performance issues he wasn't aware of. During this conversation, my heart rate went up, my ears went red, things slowed down. I realized this was serious, and the fact that my manager was having this talk with me so directly meant that this was actually a performance conversation about me, because I, as a manager, wasn't having the right performance conversation with Mark. So Mark's performance improved quite quickly as I had a serious performance conversation with him and made him aware of the gaps, and we made a plan to solve them with a deadline. He appreciated the directness, and over time, he became a high performer. My performance as a manager improved because not only did my low performers start meeting expectations, but I was then able to focus on delivering results with my whole team rather than compensating for Mark. And I was able to invest more of my time with my high performers, getting even better results. So what are these three options and why do they work? The options are in order of preference. Coach them in the current role, change the role, or fire them. There are no other options. That's it. Let me just repeat the options with a short explanation. Number one, you can coach them in their current role. You can temporarily overinvest in extra coaching for the low performer so they can meet expectations in their current role without needing ongoing extra coaching. Number two, you can change their role. You can change their role. You can help them find a new role. You can craft a new role for them, but you want to craft a role or find a role that they will be able to perform well in without extra coaching. Or you can fire them. If neither extra coaching nor the role change works within a set timeline, you must fire them. The drasticness and the deadline for the third option is what makes the other two options so powerful. No manager and no employee wants to go through a termination. So to avoid it, you both put the best effort you can into the other two options, extra coaching and role change. In most cases, this works out and nobody needs to be fired and the low performance issue is solved. But here's the thing, before you start with these three options, you actually need to be sure the problem is really with the low performing employee themselves. Because the majority of the time, maybe 80 or even 90% of the time, the real root cause is actually a system issue. It's something to do with the work environment, how you've delegated work, a mismatch of expectations, interpersonal issues with peers, or something similar. Maybe there's a tool problem, maybe there's a process problem. So your first step is to diagnose the issue. Gather information from the employee themselves, from their peers, from their customers and stakeholders, from tools, from watching them work and seeing how it actually happens. Dig deep. Try to understand about what's really going on, where the gap really is, what the cause actually is happening here. Most of the time, you'll find that it's an external cause, something systemic, something that you as a manager can change. If that's the case, you've now got some work to do to resolve that issue so they can perform at their best. And this is part of the real work of management. And it's hard work. There's a lot to do here. But in maybe 10 to 20% of cases, it's actually the person. Maybe their skills, their behavior, their motivation or attitude, something like that. And that's when you have an actual low performer rather than a system barrier to performance. And you need to use one of the three options for dealing with low performers. Now, I want to just step back a little, because while you're dealing with this, you've got to remember what low performer means. It means there's a gap between their current skills, behaviors, attitude, and motivation, and what is required for this role at this time. That doesn't make them a bad person. It doesn't even make them inherently a low performer. Like, people aren't in categories of low performers and high performers. There's low performers in this role and high performers in this role. So if you've got a low performer, it's just that they don't have what it takes to perform in this role at this moment. They're a low performer in this role now. They may be a superstar in a different environmental role. They may in the future grow to be a superstar in this role. They may have been a superstar in this role in the past. They're a good person, but something isn't fitting right. And your job as a manager is coaching them so they fit the role, finding a role they fit, or concluding that there is no role they fit and they have to leave. There's a whole lot we could say about how to have the difficult conversation about the gap in performance and expectations, and how to set up a coaching plan, how to actually coach them. But all that's for another video. So pop your questions and ideas in the comments in the meantime, and I'll post a note here when I make that video. In this video, I want to focus on the overall process and how to navigate those three options. First, coaching. So when you have a low performer, you're going to temporarily overinvest in coaching them to see if together you can solve the low performance problems so they meet expectations. I say temporarily because it's critical to set a time limit for this overinvestment. I'd recommend 3 months, at least to start with. If by the end of that intensive coaching period, you're not seeing improved performance, either meeting expectations or that they're likely to meet expectations within another month or two of intense coaching, you have to cut your losses, limit the damage, and move to other options, role change or firing them. During that 3 months, they're going to take more of your time than they would otherwise warrant. Make sure you dedicate enough time to deliver results with the rest of your team, and then allocate an extra hour or two per week to coaching this person. Be conscious about how much time you're dedicating. And while you're coaching, you'll be addressing the gaps and working on closing them, the coaching part, but you also need to spend time to identify their strengths, because these strengths always exist and people tend to respond well when their strengths are noticed. You can often build on the strengths to close the gaps while working around some of the weaknesses. As you're going through the coaching program, you need to make an honest and regular assessment of whether they're likely to get through the plan and meet expectations successfully or not, and become independently meeting expectations. Obviously, they'll still require coaching, because everyone does require coaching or benefit from coaching, but the idea is, can they be able to meet expectations without needing extra coaching? As you're making that assessment, you'll share your assessment as you go with them and the reasons for the assessment. You have to do that well before the end of the coaching period. Because if you're 1 or 2 months in and it doesn't look like they're going to make it, you need to have another difficult conversation with them about what the remaining gap is and what their future looks like if they don't close that gap in time. Now, sometimes this results in you and them working together to change the plan to help them succeed. Consult with your manager and HR to do this the right way, because sometimes that causes problems. But changing the plan can actually be the right thing to do, because what you're actually wanting to do here is get the best results, and sometimes your plan needs to be changed. Sometimes after the second or third conversation, they just dig deep and find the motivation to change and become a better performer. Sometimes they'll come to a realization that they need a different role. And that brings us to the second option, role change. If you agree with them and you also think they need a different role, and importantly, you have reason to think they would succeed in a different role, because remember, you've also been identifying some of their strengths, You can support them either by helping craft that role in your team or working with peer managers to help find a role like that in other parts of your organization. But be careful that you're not just taking the easy way out of a hard situation. Your job as a manager is to deliver results. So only do this, only craft or find another role if you really think that this person will perform in the new role and that that new role is valuable to the organization. So what I mean by that is if you're creating a new role for them, ask yourself if you'd keep that new role and hire someone else for it if the employee left after another year. Is the role itself worthwhile, or is it just a way to solve a performance problem? In which case, you're probably creating other problems by doing it, because when you create a new role and you change responsibilities in your team, you have some pluses and minuses there, and you don't want to just have bad effect on other people while you're trying to solve this one problem. And if there's a new role that you identify, whether it's new or existing in your team or somewhere else in the organization, ask yourself if, knowing what you know about this employee, their strengths and their weaknesses, would they pass your hiring bar for the role? Would you recommend them? Like, remember, they aren't inherently low performance. They have some strengths. But does this new role suit their strengths and not rely on their weaknesses enough that you would wholeheartedly endorse them for the role? Because the last thing you want to do is recommend to your peer manager to hire a low performer from your team who continues to be a low performer in their role in their team, and have that peer manager discover that you've given them a problem rather than a solution. So when you're doing this, you need to be open about performance and strengths and weaknesses, and you need to know them and the person deeply so that you can communicate honestly with the other manager. And as I say, often those strengths and weaknesses just don't fit for your role. They will fit for someone. They may fit for some other role. They most likely will fit for some role. And if you find that role in your organization, that's great. But as you're going through this, you may discover that there's just a fundamental mismatch between the person and the whole organization. Maybe they were actually a mishire. Maybe the organization has changed and now they don't fit. Or maybe they changed and no longer fit the organization. If this is the case and they realize this, then you're in luck. You can help them find a better role outside your organization, and this is a win-win situation. You get to help someone find a place where they can excel. They get your support to find that place while maintaining a job, and you get to hire someone new who's a better fit, with the benefit of understanding what made your low performer not a fit, so you can hire someone better. So if this happens, listen to their interests, counsel them on their strengths and weaknesses, and open up your network to them. You might even find you're doing one of your contacts a favor by helping them find someone who's a great fit for them and their organization, even if they're not a great fit for your organization. Of course, you would prefer them, and everyone would prefer them performing well in their current role, but if they really can't or don't want to, the sooner you both realize this and understand their real strengths, the more time you have available to them to find a different role, and the less likely you'll have to resort to firing them. And that's the third and final option. You've tried to coach them to improve performance. It hasn't worked. You can't find or create a suitable role for them in your team. They haven't decided to leave of their own accord. They're still a good person and maybe even a great performer in a different organization or a different role that is not in your organization, but that's not enough. Your team is not a family. It's a team. And there's no room for persistent low performers on your team. If you and the employee, with the support of your manager and HR, can't resolve that performance issue with the best of your efforts, then you have no other options left. And if you don't take action, you're a low-performing manager, and it's affecting your team, your peers, your stakeholders, and your manager and your organization. So this is a hard and unpleasant thing, and no one wants to do it. And that's why we have to put time limits around our low-performer coaching. But sometimes you can't avoid it, and it does have to be done. So when you're firing someone, well, this is a detailed topic that we want to go into in more detail in another video, but if you're firing someone, do it with dignity and compassion, because no matter how hard it is for you, it's going to be harder for them. So when you're with them, be 100% present for them and respectful. But make a clean break and keep your main focus on delivering results and building a high-performing team with the rest of your team, because that's the job. Remember, the vast majority of the time, the problem is not actually with the low performer, but with some sort of systemic issue, and it's your job to fix that so your team members can perform. For the rest, focused coaching will solve the problem more often than not. Coaching as a tool is very effective, and you as a manager need to be a great coach. When coaching doesn't help, changing the role can be a good alternative if you can find or craft a suitable role for the person that works for the business. Performance is relative to a role, so a low performer in one role could be a high performer in another role. If you find that fit, everybody wins. When you can't do that, You're left with the option no manager wants to take, but which every good manager must face up to sometimes, because it's the only way to consistently create high-performing teams, and that is to fire the low performers that you can't coach or find a better role for. Nobody said managing people was easy, but this is perhaps one of the most important skills for any manager to learn. Hope you found this valuable. If you did and you want to learn more management frameworks like this, I've got a course and community I'm putting together for you. You can find out more on scaleupleaders.net. The great advantage of the community there is that you'll also get to practice your coaching with peers, so you can develop your own coaching skills and apply them in your organization. Otherwise, you might find these other videos helpful as they relate to some of what we've talked about today. In the meantime, have a great week and scale well.